I drove up to that old rental cabin because I needed a break from people. Work had been stressful, and I wanted somewhere quiet with no traffic, no noise, just trees and cold air. The cabin was deep in the woods, far away from the closest town. The road leading up to it wasn't even fully paved, just gravel and dirt that kicked up dust behind my car. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was already disappearing behind the tree line and the air felt colder. The place looked simple from the outside, built with old brown logs, a small porch, one light above the door, and a metal roof that looked rusty in a few spots. It didn't bother me. I wasn't there for comfort. I just wanted silence. When I stepped inside, it smelled like wood and dust. The inside was darker than I expected, even with the lights on. There was a small kitchen, a living room area with a fireplace, and a hallway that led to a bathroom and a bedroom. Everything felt still, like no one had touched anything in a long time. There were scratches on the wooden floor and a few stains on the wall near the door, like someone spilled something and never cleaned it properly. I set my bags down and walked around to make sure I understood the layout. The windows were old and the locks looked flimsy. The door lock was thin, just a basic latch. I tested it twice because it felt weak. That first night, I made something simple to eat and sat in the quiet. The only sound was the wind outside and the occasional creak from the roof. When I tried to sleep, I realized how loud silence feels in a place like that. Every sound stood out. I heard sticks cracking outside, leaves dragging across the ground, something brushing against the wall of the cabin. I kept telling myself it was just animals, maybe deer or raccoons. Forests are full of life at night. I tried not to think too much about it. Around 2 in the morning, I suddenly woke up. I didn't know why at first. The cabin was very still, and I lay there listening to the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard something, a soft crunching sound outside, like footsteps moving very slowly on gravel or leaves. My chest tightened. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded too steady, too controlled. The steps would move, then pause, then move again. I stayed still, barely breathing, just listening until they stopped. I didn't hear anything else for a while, and eventually, I fell asleep again, but not deeply. The next morning, when I stepped outside, I noticed something that bothered me. There were footprints in the dirt near the tree line facing the cabin. They weren't animal prints. They were regular human footprints, and they looked recent. The dirt was soft from rain earlier in the week, so the prints stood out clearly. They led toward the cabin, then stopped, then walked back the opposite direction. I stared at them for a long time, trying to convince myself someone was just hiking nearby and got curious. But the prints came right up close to the porch, almost to the first step. The rest of the day, I tried to distract myself. I walked a short trail behind the cabin, took some pictures, and sat near a stream just listening to the water. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about those footprints and the sound I heard at night. As evening came, the air grew cold again. I double-checked the windows and the door even though the locks weren't strong. The sun went down fast behind the trees and darkness swallowed the place completely. The cabin felt different that second night, like something unseen was close. When I finally laid in bed, I couldn't relax. My body stayed tense, and every sound outside felt clearer than before. Sometime after midnight, the noise started again. At first, it was just soft movement in the woods, slow, steady steps. Then the steps came closer. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my heart racing. The sound stopped near the cabin just like the night before, but this time I heard something else. The sound of someone breathing. It was faint, but I could hear it. Slow and heavy breathing, right near the wall. Then there was a soft scraping sound near the door, like someone sliding their hand along the wood. The breathing got louder. I could tell they were close, maybe inches from the door. I stayed perfectly still. My mouth felt dry and my hands were shaking. After what felt like forever, the sound slowly faded and the footsteps moved away from the cabin. I didn't sleep after that. I waited quietly until the sun finally came up. When I went outside, the footprints were back. But this time there were more of them, circling the cabin, stopping near windows, near the door, and then disappearing back into the woods. I felt sick when I saw them. Someone was coming to the cabin at night and watching. Maybe they were waiting for the door not to be locked, or for me to be asleep deeply enough that they could get closer. All day I thought about leaving, but the road back to town was long and rough, and part of me thought maybe I was just overthinking things. But when night came again, the fear returned stronger than before. I barely turned the lights off before I heard it. Footsteps again, but this time faster, more direct. They came straight to the cabin. My entire body went cold. I stood there near the wall listening as someone walked right up to the front door. I heard them breathing again. They grabbed the doorknob. It rattled violently. The thin lock shook. Then the person hit the door, not hard, but just enough to test it. I backed away slowly. My hands were sweating, and I could feel every pulse in my body. After a few seconds, the rattling stopped, but I could still hear breathing. Then slow footsteps moved around the cabin again, checking maybe for another way in. They stopped near the bedroom window. I could hear slow, dragging breathing and the faint sound of fingers sliding across the glass. That moment was the longest of my life. After several long minutes, everything went quiet again. No breathing, no footsteps, nothing. I waited in silence until sunrise. The next morning, I didn't even think. I grabbed my things, loaded my car, and got out of there fast. As I drove away, I saw fresh footprints all around the cabin and one single handprint on the bedroom window. The handprint was large, and the dirt smudge showed long, thin fingers. I didn't stop driving until I reached town hours later. I booked a room in a motel and locked the door with every lock it had. Even now, weeks later, I still think about that cabin. I think about someone walking around it, knowing I was inside and waiting for the right moment. Nothing supernatural happened. No ghosts, no strange creatures, just a real person, out there in the dark, watching my every move. Someone who never said a word, never made their intentions clear, and never showed their face. Sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep, I think about how thin that cabin door really was, and I think about how close I came to never making it out of there. I rented that cabin because I wanted to be alone for a while. I was tired of everything: work, people, noise, and the same daily routine. I found the place online. The pictures showed a small wooden cabin deep in the woods near a lake. It looked peaceful. No neighbors close by, no traffic, just quiet nature. That was exactly what I thought I needed. I packed basic food, warm clothes, and a flashlight because I knew it would be dark in the woods at night. The drive there took hours. The farther I went, the fewer houses I saw. Eventually, the paved road turned into dirt and gravel. Trees surrounded both sides of the road and blocked most of the sunlight. My cell signal weakened until it disappeared completely. When I finally reached the cabin, the sun was already low in the sky. The cabin looked older than the pictures, like it hadn't been updated in years. The wood was dark and weathered, and the windows looked cloudy, like they hadn't been cleaned in a long time. The silence there felt heavy. No birds, no wind, nothing. Inside, the cabin smelled like dust and old wood. The floor creaked with every step. There was one bedroom, a small bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room area with a fireplace. The furniture looked old but usable. I checked the windows and locks out of habit. The locks were simple, nothing strong. The door had one small metal latch. It didn't feel secure, but I tried not to think about it. The first night felt strange. I wasn't used to that kind of silence. My ears kept searching for familiar sounds like cars or people talking. But there was nothing except the ticking of an old clock hanging on the wall and the occasional crack of wood from the cabin settling. When I finally went to bed, I felt tense but tired enough to fall asleep. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. Took a second before I realized what woke me. I heard something outside. Slow, careful footsteps on dried leaves. My heart beat faster. I stared at the ceiling, listening. The steps stopped close to the cabin, near the porch. Then I heard a soft thump, like someone stepped onto the wooden boards outside. I stayed frozen. My breathing felt too loud. The cabin walls were thin, and I could hear even small movements clearly. For a long time, nothing else happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just a deer or some animal walking by. I forced myself to relax until I drifted back to sleep. In the morning, I walked outside and looked around. I didn't want to admit it, but I was searching for footprints. I found some near the porch, close to the wooden steps. They didn't look like animal tracks. They looked like regular footprints, human footprints. The dirt was soft, so they were clear enough to see. I stood there staring at them, feeling my stomach twist. I told myself someone might have passed by earlier in the week. Maybe someone checked the cabin before I arrived. I tried to believe that, but deep down I didn't. The day was quiet. I tried to hike around the lake, take some pictures, and enjoy the quiet air. But I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. Every time the wind moved branches or leaves cracked under my boots, I felt jumpy. By the time the sun went down again, I already felt that same weight of silence pressing against the cabin. I checked the door lock twice. I made myself something to eat and sat near the fireplace. Even with the fire burning, the cabin felt cold. That night, I didn't fall asleep easily. I laid in bed staring into the darkness, listening. Hours passed before I finally drifted off. I woke up again, and this time it wasn't footsteps. It was breathing. Deep, slow breathing. Right outside the bedroom window. My whole body went stiff. The window was only a few feet away from my bed. I could hear the breathing clearly, too slow and too controlled to be an animal. It sounded like someone was standing still, just breathing and listening. Then I heard a soft scrape against the wood beneath the window, like fingers dragging slowly across it. My chest tightened. I didn't move. I didn't even swallow. I just lay there, waiting, listening. After a few long minutes, the breathing stopped. But then I heard footsteps again. Slow, heavy, moving around the cabin. The sound traveled from window to window, pausing at each one like someone was checking inside. By the time morning came, I hadn't slept again. When I stepped outside later, my stomach dropped. There were fresh footprints circling the entire cabin. They stopped at every window and the porch, just like what I heard during the night. The air felt colder. Even the forest sounded silent, like everything was hiding. I should have left that morning, but I talked myself out of it. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe it was just some hiker or hunter passing by. But the cabin felt different that day. I kept checking the windows, expecting someone to be staring back. That night, my last night there, I didn't even bother trying to sleep. I sat in the chair near the fireplace with the flashlight in my hand, listening. Hours went by. Then, like the previous nights, I heard the footsteps again. But this time, they didn't stop at the porch. They walked right up to the door. I heard the doorknob move slowly. Metal clicked softly. Then the door shook like someone was trying to test the lock. My heart pounded in my ears. The shaking stopped, but then I heard breathing again. This time right outside the door. Slow, deep, long breaths. I didn't move or make a sound. After a while, the breathing faded. The footsteps moved away slowly. I didn't relax until the sun finally came up. As soon as daylight hit, I packed everything fast. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped things. When I stepped outside to load my car, the air felt thick and cold. I looked toward the trees and saw nothing, but I felt like someone was still there watching. Right before I got in my car, I noticed one more footprint. It was fresh, pressed deep into the dirt, facing the cabin like someone had been standing there that morning watching the door. I drove away fast, and I never looked back at that cabin. Even now, I think about those footprints, the breathing, and the way someone walked around the cabin night after night. Whoever was out there never tried to break the window. They never spoke. They never rushed. They just waited and watched, as if they had all the time in the world. And sometimes, late at night when I'm lying in my bed, I think about how thin those window panes were and how weak that door latch felt. And then a thought hits me that makes my skin go cold. Whoever was out there knew I was alone. And they weren't in a hurry. They were waiting for the right night. The night I finally fell asleep long enough not to hear them come in. I was around 14 or 15 when this happened, still at that age where I thought nothing bad could ever really happen to me as long as I was with a friend and holding a flashlight. My family used to camp at the same state park every summer. It wasn't anything special, just a mix of pine woods, dirt trails, an old lake, and a campground that always smelled like smoke and bug spray. but back then it felt like the whole world. Every night after dinner, after the adults got lost in their own conversations, my friend and I would leave the campground and disappear into the trees. We called it the ritual. It made us feel older than we were, like we had some private adventure that only we understood. We didn't do anything exciting. Mostly we'd walk, kicking through dry leaves, shining our small flashlights up at the branches, trying to see if we could find owls or raccoons. Some nights we'd turn off the flashlights and try to move through the dark without tripping. It made us feel brave. The woods were different with the lights off. Every sound became sharp. Every shadow looked thicker. But we kept doing it night after night until it felt normal. Most nights we stayed close to the campground, maybe a 5-minute walk in. We could still see the glow of campfires through the trees, and the distant hum of people talking made the woods feel safer. But that night we decided to go deeper. I don't know why. Maybe we were bored. Maybe we were trying to prove something to ourselves. The woods felt extra quiet that night, and the air had that cold bite that settles in after the sun drops. The kind of air that makes you hear your own breathing. We walked farther than we ever had before. The trees grew taller and the ground got more uneven, filled with roots and little dips that made us watch where we stepped. We were far enough in that the campground noise had completely disappeared. No more fire crackling, no laughter from other campsites, no clanking of pots or someone dragging a folding chair. It was just the woods and our footsteps. Eventually, like we usually did, we turned off our flashlights to see how long we could last. When the darkness closed around us, it felt thicker than usual, almost like it pressed on my shoulders. I remember blinking a few times just to adjust, but the woods were pitch black. The only light came from the faint outline of the sky through the branches. We walked slow, feeling for the ground before each step. I kept one hand out in front of me, just in case. We were maybe half a mile from the nearest campsite when I heard it. Soft whispering, not words I could understand, not even loud enough to guess the tone. Just a faint, breathy noise behind us, like someone trying to speak but holding their voice back. At first I told myself it was wind through the trees, or maybe a deer moving through leaves. But the more I listened, the more it sounded like something trying to form words. My chest tightened and all the small hairs on my arms stood up. Instinct kicked in. I switched on my flashlight and spun around so fast I almost slipped on a root. My friend did the same. Our lights cut through the darkness, slicing between the trees, hitting trunks, ferns, and uneven ground. But nothing moved. Nothing looked out of place. I told myself I probably imagined it. The woods could play tricks on you when you took away your sight. We kept walking a little faster this time, and the idea of turning the flashlights off again was gone. Neither of us said it, but we both felt it. Then we heard it again. This time it was slightly louder. Still soft, still whisper-like, but clearer. We stopped dead in our tracks. I felt frozen in place, every part of me alert. I scanned the darkness behind us with my light, slower this time, making sure I covered every inch. My friend did the same. I didn't see anything, but I had that heavy feeling you get when someone is watching you. That pressure in the back of your neck that makes you want to turn around over and over again. We finally decided to head back. The woods didn't feel fun anymore. They didn't even feel like the same woods we had walked through 100 times. They felt tight and wrong, like something cold had started moving between the trees. As we turned to leave, something caught my eye. A shape on the ground maybe 20 yards away. At first I thought it was an animal because it was low and hunched. But the longer I stared, the more it looked like a person. My chest felt like it dropped into my stomach. It was a woman, crawling. She was moving slowly, dragging herself across the ground, her clothes dark and covered in dirt. I couldn't see her face at first, just the outline of her body and the way her arms pulled her forward. The whispering sound was coming from her, but it didn't sound like words. It sounded like thoughts leaking out of someone who wasn't fully aware of what they were doing. I felt frozen. My brain couldn't make sense of the image in front of me. Nothing in the woods should crawl toward two teenagers in the dark. Nothing should whisper like that. For a moment, I thought maybe she was hurt, or maybe she was dangerous, or maybe both. Then she lifted her head. Her face was smeared with dirt, streaked across her cheeks and forehead. Her hair looked tangled like she had been rolling on the ground. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, like she was trying to find something but couldn't lock onto anything. Standing there in the woods with my flashlight beam shaking over her face, I felt more scared than I ever had in my life. Something about the way she moved didn't seem right. Something about the way she stared made the whole forest feel wrong. She slowly pushed herself to her feet. I could see her legs wobbling like she had been crawling a long time. She kept whispering, but it still didn't make sense. It was just broken sounds. She looked like someone who had been wandering the woods for hours without knowing where she was. She wasn't threatening. She wasn't angry, but there was something deeply unsettling about the whole moment. Seeing someone like that, alone, dirty, crawling toward us in the dark woods, whispering to herself, it felt like a scene from a nightmare, but it was real. We ended up guiding her back toward the campground. She couldn't walk straight, and she moved like every step confused her. The whole way back I kept looking around, checking the trees, checking the shadows, half expecting something else to appear. But it was just us, the woman, and the dark. As we got closer to the lights of the campground, the woods slowly started feeling normal again. The trees didn't seem as tight. The air didn't feel as heavy. The whispering stopped. She walked a bit steadier, like the sight of nearby campsites gave her something to focus on. When we reached the campground area, we tried to help her find her group. Took a while. Most of the campsites were quiet, and people were already inside their tents or around dim fire pits. We kept walking with her until we finally found a group of people who recognized her. They hadn't even noticed she was missing. She had just tried to find a bathroom and wandered into the woods in the wrong direction. She was extremely drunk, maybe high too, and had ended up deeper in the forest than she realized. The relief I felt when her group came over to get her was something I can still remember in my chest. She wasn't dangerous. She wasn't some creature or anything like that. She was just a person who got lost in a place that becomes terrifying the moment you lose control of your surroundings. That night changed how I looked at the woods. Before that, they were just a dark place we walked through for fun. After that, I understood how quickly things could go wrong. How easy it is to get turned around, to panic, to lose your sense of direction. And how sometimes the scariest things in the woods aren't animals or shadows or strange noises. Sometimes it's just another human being who wandered too far and lost themselves in the dark. Looking back now, I realize how lucky she was. If we hadn't walked that far into the woods that night, she would have stayed there crawling and whispering for who knows how long. The temperature dropped that night. She wasn't dressed for the cold. She wasn't thinking clearly. She could have ended up miles away from any trail, deeper and deeper into the forest, until morning came and nobody knew where to even start looking. The thing that still sits with me is how quiet everything was before we heard her. No crunching leaves, no branches breaking, no breathing, just that soft whispering out of nowhere in the middle of a huge dark forest. Sometimes I think about how long she had been out there, how many times she might have crawled close to a trail, whispering to herself, hoping someone would hear her. Even now, years later, whenever I camp, I never walk the woods in the dark without a light on. The darkness isn't a game anymore. That night taught me that you never really know who else might be out there, stumbling around, lost, scared, whispering things you can't quite understand until your flashlight finally lands on them. And sometimes the fear you feel doesn't come from danger. It comes from the realization that the only thing separating safety and disaster is a few wrong steps in the dark. I rented the cabin because I needed space from everything. My phone, people, work, noise, I just wanted silence. The listing said it was an old hunting cabin deep in the woods, about an hour from the nearest town. It looked simple, nothing fancy, and that was exactly what I wanted. A bed, a roof, and quiet. I drove there in late afternoon. The road slowly narrowed and turned rough. By the last 10 minutes, I felt like I was barely driving on a real road. Trees stretched high on both sides, blocking most of the sunlight. The forest looked untouched, thick, and quiet in a way that felt almost heavy. When I finally reached the cabin, it looked older than the pictures. The wood was darker, weather-stained, and the roof looked like it needed repairs. There was a small porch with a broken railing and a single window facing the dirt clearing where I parked. Behind the cabin, the woods grew even thicker. There were no signs of other houses, no sounds of cars, no trails, just trees everywhere. I stepped inside and the smell hit me first. Old wood, dust, and maybe a little mold. The floor creaked loudly under my boots. The cabin had one main room with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen area with an old gas stove, and a small hallway leading to a single bedroom and bathroom. Everything felt still. No humming fridge, no heater noise, just silence. I dropped my bags, walked around slowly, and locked every window and door. The place didn't feel dangerous, but it felt exposed. Like if something wanted to come in. There was nothing stopping it but thin wood and old locks. Before sunset, I walked a bit around the clearing. The forest floor was covered in leaves and branches, soft and uneven under my feet. The trees stood close together, and the deeper I looked, the darker it became. I didn't go far. Something about those woods didn't feel right. Not in a supernatural way, just in a way where you know you could get lost fast and no one would ever find you. As daylight faded, I went back inside and lit a fire. The crackling sound made the cabin feel less empty. I heated a can of soup, ate quietly, and tried to relax. The silence outside felt endless. No traffic, no far-off machinery, nothing human. Just wind and sometimes something small moving in the leaves. Later that night, around maybe 10 or 11, the sounds changed. The soft, natural noises faded, and something heavier took their place. I heard footsteps outside. Not animal steps, these were slow, measured, and spaced apart like a person walking. My body stiffened and I held my breath. The footsteps stopped near the porch. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears. I stared at the front door, waiting, listening. Then the porch would creak under weight. Whoever was out there had stepped onto it. I sat frozen on the couch, my back straight, eyes locked on the door. The firelight flickered across the walls, making shadows move. The doorknob twitched, barely, like someone testing it gently. I stayed completely still. After a few seconds, the knob stopped moving. Then nothing. No more steps. No breathing. No movement. The silence outside returned, but not in a peaceful way. It felt wrong, like someone was still there, just waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake with the fire poker in my hand, watching the door and windows until morning. When sunlight finally showed, I walked outside to check the porch. The dirt was soft from recent rain, and there were footprints. Human footprints. One set. They approached the cabin and stopped at the porch steps, then disappeared where the wood began. The size looked average, maybe a man's shoe, but I couldn't tell more than that. I felt sick looking at them. That confirmed it wasn't my imagination. For most of the day, I tried to calm myself. I told myself it could have been a hiker or hunter passing by, maybe someone curious about the cabin. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that settled deep in my stomach. But as daylight faded again, the fear came back stronger. I didn't want to wait in the dark again, but there was nothing else I could do. There was nowhere else to go. No cell service, no nearby neighbors, no road lights. Just trees. That night, I kept every light on. I sat near the fire again, staring at the door. Hours passed slowly, and nothing happened at first. The silence stretched on so long I started to believe maybe the person left and wouldn't come back. Then, I heard branches snapping somewhere behind the cabin. My heart dropped. The footsteps returned, slow, careful, deliberate. This time, they didn't approach the front. They moved around the side of the cabin. I heard them stop under the bedroom window. I didn't move. I just listened. There was breathing. Slow, steady breathing, not mine. It was close, just inches from the thin glass. I felt every muscle in my body tense. Then something tapped the glass once. Light, almost questioning. I gripped the poker so tight my hand hurt. The breathing lingered there for what felt like forever, then slowly faded as the footsteps moved away. I heard them walking back toward the woods, slow, unhurried steps disappearing into the distance. Again, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake until sunrise, eyes heavy and burning. That morning, I at least thought clearly enough to pack. I threw everything into my bags fast but quiet, like noise would draw something back. I didn't check the clearing or the woods. I didn't care about footprints anymore. I just needed to leave. Once everything was in the car, I locked the cabin door behind me even though it wouldn't matter. I got in, started the engine, and drove fast through the trees, not stopping until the road turned wider and cell service came back. I didn't report anything. I didn't want to explain something I never really saw. There were no faces, no voices, just footsteps, breathing, and someone watching from the dark. But I do think about it sometimes. I think about how slow those steps were, how patient they sounded, like the person wasn't lost and wasn't scared, like they had done this before. And what scares me the most isn't that someone walked around the cabin. What scares me is how long they stood completely still, close enough to breathe against a window, like they were waiting for the exact moment I made a mistake. I booked the cabin because I needed a break from everything. Work had been stressing me out, my sleep schedule was ruined, and my head felt foggy all the time. The cabin was small, isolated, and old-looking in the photos, but it was cheap and had good reviews. People said it was peaceful and quiet. That's what I wanted. Quiet. I drove there in late afternoon. The road slowly changed from pavement to gravel, then from gravel to a narrow dirt path surrounded by tall trees. The deeper I drove into the woods, the more I started to realize how far away it was from everything. My cell signal dropped to practically nothing. By the time I reached the cabin, I couldn't call or text anyone. The cabin was simple. Dark wood walls, one front window, a small porch, and an old metal fire pit a few feet from the steps. Behind it, trees stretched for what looked like miles, dense, thick, almost swallowing the entire place. There were no other houses around. No lights, no sounds except wind and birds. Inside, it smelled like pine and something old, dusty maybe. There was one small bedroom, a bathroom with weak water pressure, a fireplace, and a little kitchen with basic stuff. A fridge, a few dishes, and an old gas stove. The floor creaked loudly every time I moved. At first, the silence felt peaceful. I sat down on the couch and listened to the wind pushing against the cabin walls. It was nice not hearing traffic or people or notifications. I unpacked slowly, trying to unwind. I checked the windows, making sure they locked. Something about being that isolated made me want everything secure. Before it got dark, I walked outside, trying to explore a little. The air felt different, cleaner but colder. The forest was thick, and the ground was covered in leaves, sticks, and old pine needles. There were no trails near the cabin, not that I could see. The trees were close together, and the deeper I looked, the darker it seemed. Something small moved in the distance, maybe a deer or raccoon. I didn't focus on it too long. I knew wildlife was normal. Still, something about how silent it got after that made my skin crawl. Even the wind stopped. For a moment, it felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. I headed back inside before the sun fully disappeared. When night came, the silence changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, thick. I hadn't realized how loud nature at night could be. Crickets, distant animal sounds, wind pushing branches together. It all felt constant and close. The cabin walls felt thin, like anything outside could be right next to me without me knowing. I tried to distract myself by reading, but I kept getting this weird sensation that someone, or something, was outside, not watching, just standing there. Still, around midnight, I started hearing noises. Not nature sounds. Something else. Something heavier. Footsteps. Slow ones. I froze on the couch, listening. The steps weren't rushed. They were steady, like someone walking in a careful circle around the cabin. The sound of leaves crunching under weight told me it wasn't a small animal. The steps stopped, then started again. They sounded closer. My breathing got shallow. I didn't move. I just sat there and listened. The footsteps paused near the front of the cabin. I didn't look toward the door at first. I stared at the wall, heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. Then, very slowly, I turned my head toward the window. The curtains were thin, and the moonlight outside lit them just enough that I could see a faint shadow behind it. A shape, Someone standing still, inches away from the glass. My stomach dropped. My body locked up. I didn't know what to do. I stayed completely still, hoping the shape would move or vanish, but it didn't. Minutes passed. Finally, the shadow shifted. I could hear slow breathing through the glass. Something was out there. Person. They weren't moving, just standing there listening. My hand slowly reached for the fireplace poker leaning near the firewood stack. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal, and I held it tight. Then the shadow moved away. The footsteps started again, walking away from the cabin into the woods. They grew quieter and quieter until I couldn't hear them at all. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch gripping the poker, staring at the window until the sun finally came up. When the morning light filled the cabin, everything felt less threatening. The silence didn't feel dangerous. For a moment, I thought maybe my mind had played tricks on me. Maybe the isolation or stress was messing with me. But outside, the dirt around the cabin showed footprints. Deep ones, fresh ones. They circled the entire place. My stomach tightened and my hands shook a little. This wasn't imagination. Someone had been there. I thought about packing and leaving right away, but part of me tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a hunter or someone lost. Maybe someone lived nearby. I kept trying to talk myself into staying calm. I stayed another night because I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to feel like I was running away from nothing. That evening, I built a fire outside before it got dark. The flames made the area feel warm, less empty. I sat beside it for a while, watching sparks float up into the night. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. Even the crickets stopped. The feeling of being watched hit me again. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my chest tightened. My eyes kept drifting toward the tree line. The longer I stared, the more I felt like something was there just beyond the darkness. I put out the fire and went inside. It didn't take long before I heard the footsteps again. This time they didn't circle. They walked straight toward the cabin slowly, like whoever it was knew they didn't need to rush. I grabbed the poker again and stepped back from the window. My heart was pounding harder than before. I could hear breathing outside the front door. Not animal breathing, human. Then I heard the doorknob move just slightly. Not enough to open it, just enough to test if it was locked. It was. Silence followed. Long silence. I stood there gripping the metal so tight my hands hurt. Then the footsteps moved to the side of the cabin. I backed away, moving toward the hallway. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I could hear the slow, careful steps outside, moving along the wall, heading toward the bedroom window. I didn't want to go into the bedroom. I didn't want to look at that window, but I had to. I walked slowly, every step sounding loud in the quiet cabin. My chest felt tight and my mouth was dry. I stopped before the window and forced myself to look. For a second, I saw nothing. Then, slowly, a head lifted just enough to peek into the window. Pale skin, dark hair, eyes looking straight in. My body froze. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The person didn't blink. They just stared through the glass, face emotionless, eyes following me as if waiting for something. I stepped back, gripping the poker tighter. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. Then the face lowered out of view. The footsteps walked away again. I didn't hear anything after that. Not footsteps, not breathing, nothing. I stayed awake until morning again, every muscle in my body tense. When daylight finally returned, I grabbed everything I had, shoved it into my bags, and ran to my car. I didn't look at the woods. I didn't look at the windows. I didn't care if I left anything behind. I drove fast until I reached the main road and cell service returned. When I finally stopped, my hands were still shaking. I never reported it. I didn't know what to report. I never went back for the rest of the week I paid for. I didn't want answers. I didn't want to know who that person was or what they wanted. I just know one thing now. Silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means someone is close, listening, waiting.